This is 10th session. It's entitled Tying It All Together, Next Steps. And I've cut the slide productions into two parts for the first and second part of the session. I go like this. And this is one in which nominally we were scheduled ourselves months ago and laying this out to sort of tie it all together. And in there amongst it there was a statement about saying, okay, Doug is supposed to tell you how all this happened. And so I just have to tell you up front, I started making a bunch of slides about how it all happened, and it just went on and on and on about this idea hit me, and then I couldn't do this, and then I realized that, etc., and I threw it away. So I've got a much shorter way of sort of building into giving you an overview about how we've sort of what we've been through in the past, and then try to converge on what's next in there like this. So anyway, the sort of why and how did this strategic framework evolve, and that's going to evolve, as I said, and then recapping the entire colloquium content via what I call a paradigm map. And for some years I was giving the presentations with this paradigm map, and so I'll slip it in there a little bit so it sort of emphasizes this belief I have that the prevailing paradigms are such a compellingly important factor in how or how not where society is going to get ready for its future. So anyway, and so then if all of this is it's a strategic sort of opening up a campaign and a sort of here's how we can approach the future. Well, we'd like to get it started. So today we'll bring up some more of the issues at several different levels about the getting it started going in there like this, which includes sort of a general call to action. It's sort of like saying, well, if you want to see it happen, people are going to have to get active in it like this. So then in the general statement in the first half, and the second half we'll get more specific about that. So anyway, this has been essentially a lifetime goal. At least I set it about 49 years ago, any day now. One Saturday 49 years ago in the spring, I sort of made a commitment, and I'd made a partial commitment up to that point, but that Saturday when I began to realize that all the other things I was thinking to try to do got to be more and more complex in the world, and trying to save this or that, a crusade in the world. So I just broke through and realized that the world is getting very complex, and the problems are getting more complex and more urgent, and they are issues that have to be dealt with collectively. And if our collective ability to deal with complex, urgent things isn't increasing fast enough, we're going to get swamped. So what could be done about that? So that set about this whole career. So it's been 49 years of unrelenting looking at it, because it became something built in that I just intuitively was certain of, that there is a great deal that the world could do about it, and that it'd be important to do it. And many of the ensuing years when, boy, things would get really bleak, I'd have been fired, or I have been told that yes, you can continue doing this, but you have to be reported to this guy over here, and there are going to be no raises for you, no reviews, and stay out of trouble. So, and you say, why am I doing this? And you go through the thinking about it and say, every year sooner that the world would get the idea that it really could bootstrap its way into a much higher level of collective capability, every year sooner could make an extremely significant difference. So if I quit now, it might make how much difference? It'd take 2 months more or 2 years longer to do it. That could be a significant factor. So that really has been a lifetime goal, and I really like to communicate some of it. It's not an abstract thing that, oh boy, I sit there and come across this and it's nice to deliver a paper and then go about my business. This has just been my life, and it's just driven me. And this colloquium session has just been extremely sort of galvanizing, but also really challenging, because the problem that's sort of a mystery to me all the years is, why aren't I getting across? Why doesn't everybody see it? And I honestly don't know, but I just know that, okay, someplace there's some magic of marketing or something that would do the job. or else paradigms are still not nearly aligned enough. But anyway, the prevailing paradigm out in the world, with the World Wide Web and stuff, is just really moving. So maybe it's close enough now. So anyway, so these issues hit me even back in the 50s about paradigms and scaling. So I talk about this thing to people, and somebody that says, well, interactive computer use, all I need is at least 20 minutes of turnaround time, and anything lower than that, I don't see how I could use it. And somebody else says, all you're talking about is information retrieval. And no, it's more than that. No. Or cognitive psychology. No, it's more than that. So anyway, a very important study I did was on dimensional scaling. And so it really brought home something that small changes in an environment usually bring small quantitative effects. Larger changes start producing qualitative effects, and many of them are surprising. But large changes really do. It's like, oops, really surprising differences, because you're just not oriented for how much everything is interdependent, and something change enough and you don't realize in the way you just view the world that they are interdependent, and that thus you'll start having other changes in there hit you like this. So that experience just set me up for really realizing that the paradigm was all important on this thing. So this kind of implication, we said, well, what if humans were as small as a mosquito? What would your relative design characteristic be? Well, you'd just be terribly over-structured. And so what if mosquitoes were large as a human? They would be terribly understructured. They couldn't even stand on their feet, see? If humans were 10 times taller or wider, etc., we went through that one time and realized you'd be on the floor gasping for breath. If gravity was 10 times weaker, what would have happened? So if digital technology was smaller, faster, cheaper, by a factor of 100,000, million, 10 million, okay, that's a similar kind of thing that's going to hit us, that digital technology is coming across, and it's just really going to be so much cheaper and faster and broader band. And so just that alone can just turn our world upside down. Just wait and see. So anyway, this is controlled by our paradigms. So in the face of the greatest avalanche of pervasive, and pervasive is important, pervasive global change ever faced by human society, that's the paradigm scale I see in there like that. That nothing of this scale in a qualitative sense, since maybe we shifted from hunter-gatherer to agriculture, made a huge change. But this is going to happen very much faster and big change. So our paradigm-limited perspectives are dangerously fail to recognize the consequent range and depth of either the threats or the opportunities for mankind. So this is just, it's just basic to all these things I've been studying in. If there's some way that, you know, we could get people to start looking at that more detailed, I'd love to join groups to actually start working on it, to say, is that just my intuition, or is it something for real? And am I one seeing something that's distorted, or are the other people not seeing something that's inevitable? So this would be very important. So here's a paradigm map I made, and I used to use it quite a bit. So every one of these boxes around here, and what we're going to do is just step our way from objective, capability, infrastructure, step our way around that clockwise. And each one is a stage of thinking, and it sort of involves a shift in some concepts, etc., like that, and paradigms like that. So this first one is saying, okay, the objective, well, coping with complexity and urgency collectively and in high performance, and really get to an improvement strategy for that. So we say, okay, what do we do next? So as we step through this box by box, the box will be having the red bound border on it, and there'll be appear in the middle of it the sort of a diagram, some of them graphics that you've seen before, etc. But it sort of shows how they build up. And this is in lieu of a review in detail. This is going through the thing. So anyway, the key target customer is the human organization for me. So yes, individuals can be augmented considerably, but their impact on the world and their value really gets to be how does what they contribute integrate into the collective action that's going on, which is a value. See? So anyway, the collective IQ is, we've talked about enough to say, well, Engelbart feels like it's a real factor. And yes, I think if you put a big envelope around any organization and judged it by the external appearance of what it does, like that, you could say, oh, that's an organism that I could judge to see how intelligent it is. How well does it keep track of what's going on in the outside world, and how well does it cope, and et cetera, et cetera. So it would be just terrific if the world got interested enough in this thing to work up sort of measures and calibrations and say, how do we get a rating? So how do we get a rating for, you know, your team or your school or your corporation or your state or your country? A rating for it to see how well it seems to be coping in this IQ business and like that. So I think that would be terrific if at some time we can get measures like that, and it really will help everybody see where his organization stands. So anyway, and as with biological organisms, evolution happens. So spurred on one hand by a sudden mutation of a radically improved nervous system. That's what the digital stuff is essentially equivalent to. And affected heavily by environmental changes in their ecological niches. Evolution of all other organizations and institutions is simultaneously accelerating. So double pressure on an organization. It's evolving internal capability improvement while adapting to radically changing environments. So either one of those would be a challenge, but when they're happening simultaneously at rates and complexities we haven't tasted before, it just means we're being pressured in time like that. So anyway, so an organization's effectiveness depends upon its capability infrastructure. And this is a concept that evolved, you know, back in 1961 or something for me. Just, oh my God, yes, it is. You know, bigger capabilities depend upon a set of smaller ones, etc. And for the emergent large-scale technology change, our paradigms for guiding and applying technology have to be significantly modified if you really look at that whole infrastructure of capabilities. So here's the picture that we could start with. So we went through this exercise once before. We just said, okay, by infrastructure we mean if here, the top up here is a salient capability that you're concerned with, it's dependent in turn upon aggregate capabilities of lower order capabilities, and those in turn of lower orders, etc. So it's not hierarchy. I miscalled it that for years, hierarchy, capability hierarchy. Right in the middle of one of my seminars, somebody said, it's not a hierarchy, and I looked and I said, well, that's right, it isn't. Anyway, but so the sense of that infrastructure and then the pervasiveness of changes within it that will be caused fairly directly by these new technologies mean that all kinds of changes are going on above it, multiply affected by lower order ones. So we say, okay, is that the picture we want to deal with? Well, let's see. Here's what we actually had in the paradigm map, that the concept of that infrastructure in the paradigm sort of consideration is very important. At least it's been for me very, very important. So then what's next? Well, we go through some evolution of looking how you look at the capabilities. It says, okay, hey, a lot of the world, the techie-oriented people say, oh boy, all these kind of technology things can come in and that's what makes the difference. So he says, yeah, that's right. It just really does that you know, any one of these things manipulates data, retrieving stuff like that, affects many places in there. So sure enough. He says, and if this is changing rapidly, look what's going to happen. And he says, yes, but that's only part of the story. So this was the breakthrough for me, you know, 40 years ago, was saying, oh yes, the humans there, and the difference, the way human sensory, perceptual, mental, motor activities are also producing how they work in there, and if it's going to change quite a bit, these things have to change. You know, your habits and practice and stuff like that. So, okay, the same basic capabilities are there, but you need to start learning more about things. Oh, learning about things? Oh, that means you're going to get new skills and knowledge and training, etc. like that if your capability infrastructure is going to change. That's right, that's right. So, okay, this is what? You can go buy your technology and somebody will train you. And he says, okay, great. But is that all? Well, let's see. No, let's see. There are a few other things that are going to change concurrently with that. That almost many of the procedures by which you do things, customs, processes, methods, language, very language we're using has been affected already, and it's going to be affected immensely in the future in ways. It's one of the surprises in my estimation, of what's lying in wait for us all, is the kind of change that's going to come about in language. Fundamentally, language is a way in which the concepts you hold in your mind get symbolized. And then with those symbols, it turns out there's a difference in the way you can manipulate symbols in lieu of actually fumbling to grapple with the concepts themselves. And if you get these symbols that you can use externally, then you can communicate to people. And then you can put them down on some media and start manipulating them in lieu of doing the thinking and processes. If the computer can help you do that, then you can probably start doing different kind of concept manipulation. Also, these externalized symbols that have been using like that grew and evolved in environments that are very much different from now. So maybe the very symbology we use to represent our concepts can start changing because the computer can lay them out so quickly in a much refined way. Hey, maybe we can back down into our machinery inside of our heads and start redoing some of that so that we can take advantage of new ways that the computer can respond to us, sense what we're trying to do signal to it like that, portray things in all the senses, etc. So we may just find that, in 20 years or so, that people look back on us now as sort of dark age people that, had very crude ways of expressing in language, very crude ways of manipulating, etc. But anyway, the outset of this is not to be more fashionable about how you can do your thinking and working, but it's how much more effective we can be as a society to handle the complex problems we see and do that. So anyway, so this became sort of this whole picture, which all of these things inside here are going to be co-evolving with eruptive changes on the right-hand side. And it's just, I've told this colloquium several times about experience in the 70s when everybody talked about interactive computers as automating the office, and that's what they assumed, that it was all the rest of it was going to stay the same except you automating what you used to do. Well, that paradigm was so entrenched and strong that we just couldn't in our group, even though we were demonstrating things quite dramatically different, which now we get awards for, see, that in those days the prevailing paradigm was so entrenched that it just, without much of a quibble, just pushed us right off the research world. And peer review from all sorts of sources, universities, research groups, government, etc., just said, well, you're obviously in the wrong direction. and for some of the reasons that we've talked about before. And some of them, my friend who's much better histrionic than I am, Ted Nelson, last week said, WYSIWYG. Well, WYSIWYG was a great invention for a way, if what you really wanted was to really see better what you're going to do when you do high quality printing. But it really limited people by saying that, of course, that's what you want to see in the computer interface, because what it's for is to produce paper, print. And you start saying, no, you could fold it up and get all kinds of views. So we're going to talk about that later in the second half of how somehow we can start more evolution going in these optional views, etc. But anyway, it's just great. So this picture here just tells so much, and it's going to pop up a few times again. I'm warning you. This is no surprise to the regulars here that Doug keeps coming back to it, and you could say, hey, we've seen that before. And what I'd like to do is sit down with people and really bore down in here to say, hey, let's just take this apart and see what kind of things we find in the details in there. So anyway, so that was the kind of thing when I called it this an augmentation system. Excuse me. So your whole capability infrastructure is availed of itself by this kind of tool system and human system, and that's just fundamental. So as a part of the paradigms, that was extremely important to set that there. So we go to the next thing and says, we started making some simple ways in which we showed two dimensions. One is the tool system, how sophisticated it is out there, and the other is the human system, likewise how sophisticated. And this was a bad representation in the old days, and I apologize for it. Later I figured out a much better way in which society is distributed across there. But in any event, with the world moving fast out here in the technology, you see that opens up all sorts of new opportunities in the human system side, and that if it's just essentially a new territory, we call it the coevolution frontier. But that was very important to put that down as a paradigm. It's a coevolution. And one thing we know from looking at the at that infrastructure is that it isn't a simple thing of this thing is evolving by a factor of 3 and this thing then has to change by 2.5. The technology changes in lots of ways and pervades throughout the infrastructure in many impact ways, which changes much in there, so that it really isn't any single dimension to the way in which you can say the human system changes. It's a multidimensional way in which those dimensions are co-evolving themselves. So the coevolution is really in a many-dimension field. And so finding your way into the future of that, it's just a mesh. It's a hell of a mesh. Anyway, so but as setting up the paradigms, it was just very important to start getting a feeling for that. And if we go ahead with talking with people about improvement infrastructures and the like, and we can't sort of all be looking at this as sort of much change and sophisticated, interconnected, interoperable changes that are going on in there, then we're talking different languages. And so the world today, most of the leaders that have to run an organization are just conditioned to be tactically oriented for what's happening there and how you manage it like that. And they don't seem to be oriented about thinking about complexity, things like that. They've been depending for years upon other people telling them some simple way to deal with the complexity of a design or something. So it's just a hard thing to communicate. Assuming you all believed it like I do, then what would you do to go out there and try to get the rest of the world more oriented about this kind of coevolution? So anyway, this is much more a real kind of a plot that I assumed, that if you went around the world and you checked on different societies there, they would have a distribution, I would guess something like this, that some of them are quite primitive, but never down to zero human system. And sometimes some of their spiritual, etc., qualitative things about the way they relate to people could be superior to what we experience in our world today. But anyway, there's a distribution of them, and so we'd say that, well, probably the people who are listening and talking to us feel that they're in some organization quite a ways up here. And then the boundary here in the technology has been inching to the right steadily over the decades, centuries, but at such a pace that it didn't really stress everything and opened up changes in the human system. See, just consider elevators showed up. And, so suddenly you could build multi-story buildings. Oh, but how many years did it take before that evolved into those buildings appearing, and the changes in urban life considerably about that, and things like that, and the changes in the way commerce and business was done because people could be grouped so much more, things like that. So anyway, but all that was slow, decades. But today, what's going to happen? Well, we say this kind of change rate is a disparity between the changes in our external environment and the changes at which our organizations can cope with. So we say it's much more like this, isn't it? That the technologies moved the tool system way out here. So, oh yes, boy, the web and e-commerce and everything else like that, wow, it's just a lot of unexplored territory here. But that's all right. We know we're buying from a vendor who shows us the tools and ways to do it, so we've got the path. And it says, oh, tell me how that vendor knows what path is through there. Oh, they're top of the marketplace. I know, but what they're clever at is dealing with the market and grabbing market share and doing that, and know whom to deal with in your organization to sell better, etc. And are they responsible to you or the other stakeholders in your organization? Are they have any responsibility to about the optimum evolution of your organization? Well, not really. But anyway, so these are the things to think about, which I really wish there was more dialogue I could get with people who know things in the marketplace to try to piece that out together, just to say, is my instinct about that the marketplace isn't up to it, that what's necessary for the evolution of moving out into that space, right, is proactive end-user organizations who are in the business themselves of sampling and trying to decide what's going on, taking responsibility instead of sitting there watching everybody else, oh well, I may as well do this. So that's one of the paradigm issues about this thing, is who's going to take responsibility. So the other things to think about is the little thing called nanotechnology, which we had speeches on, talks on, and which I believe firmly is going to explode. And so it's inevitable, I consider. For instance, you'll be able to hold in your hand, in the way of speed and power and storage, as much as now exists in the whole world. So I was told this by Eric Drexler a couple of years ago, that that's one way to measure, say what's likely to happen. And I believe it. Just, I did enough scaling studies and things like that. There's just no reason in the world why that isn't going to happen. And so, as it does, what's that going to do to everything we look around, see? Surgically implanted personal computers, sure. I used to kid people about that 30 years ago, I guess it was. And intelligent agents, which you can utilize. Okay, you have at your control a whole bunch of slaves that maybe aren't as smart as you, but they're trained and they'll respond. So what does it take on your part to learn how to make use of a whole fleet of smart agents, smart slaves? And then of course the other side of that is, hey, they're continually going to get smarter. Oh, how soon are they going to gang up on us and say, who needs the humans? They'd run a much more efficient world without us. So that's one of the real issues. So anyway, those things brought me to feeling like this is more of the picture about what we have to be. That within, if you consider the time constant for an organization to move in this space, and you consider that this is probably something like the space we ought to think about, whether this is 5 years off or 10 years off, it doesn't make much difference, because we got to plan for where it's going to be in 10 years, because we're not going to build up much momentum and learn much about how to move in this space otherwise. So this just becomes the picture. So it's again, it's a paradigm issue. It's like, how much would you bet on it? There's a lot of our future people are just implicitly betting on what that's going to be like, because we're sort of passively going along with the prevailing paradigm, which is, well, things are a little different, we have to change, and yes, e-commerce is going to make a difference, and etc. But what about the school system, the education system, the way, and there's so many problems that are arising due to this. Excuse me. So anyway, this is just a very big paradigm issue here. So anyway, about that lifetime thing. So that's my goal, to, as much as possible, to see if we can boost mankind's collective capability for coping with complex, urgent problems. So then you make the observation, oh, purposeful pursuit of item 1 is itself a complex, urgent problem. Oh yeah. So that started some real thinking back there, something like that. So one of the things it does is lead you to saying, okay, if we're going to really complex and urgent, we're going to have to invest in that significantly. So it's a complicated sort of thing, and if nominally our investment produced stepwise functional changes in our capability, and if we thought just like any other investor would think, is there some strategy I can use where I get compounded returns on there? So the world is full of business people that are just at that totally and say that's what runs the world. And yet you try to talk to them about, hey, there's a strategy for how you go about changing the way your organizations work that could actually get that bootstrapping. Oh, well, all right. So one of the things I like is, hey, if any of you got some idea or empathy about this, come help us sort of make a picture and try to communicate to the world. And either that or communicate to Doug Engelbart that he's just way off, which could happen. So anyway, so this brings a strategic question. What would yield that compounded return on investment. So it's just a question. So we ought to have business people, oriented business people flocking around to say, hey, what would? Well, in the first place, I think investing in improving their own capability in their own organization, they'll do it on things about efficiency in the product line or cost savings, etc., like that. But we're talking here about the collective smarts, but we're also talking about improving their improvement infrastructure, so that that's something that it doesn't fit in their vocabulary very well yet. So we come around to this thing before. We said, oh, once before, we came back on this diagram and said, if your organization has this capability, picturing the capability infrastructure which your organization has and depends upon, at what level and how prominent is the capability for improving your organization? See? And it says, oh, well, we have a human factors person that's had a degree in management something or other. Oh, I see. And we go to these lectures every once in a while about something, and I see. And we got consultants out there that are telling us the latest thing. I see. Okay, but what is really the infrastructure? What's the process? How do you know how much you budget for it, etc.? Oh, well, so this is another paradigm thing, that if organizations don't get sort of explicit about their improvement process and actually know how much they're spending on it, etc., then it just doesn't seem to be any chance at all that they're going to be able to cope with the changes in the world. So anyway, so we came across 10 years or so this kind of a picture that we've talked about quite often in here. We said, if you divide the activities in your organization into at least 3 categories, and you say activity A is that which does its everyday business and it uses its everyday knowledge to do it, etc., then that's important. But then you say, if you have any activity at all, somebody wearing a hat for half an hour a week, or somebody assigned to it as a head of a committee or whatever, that's there to improve the capability to do your everyday work, then let's categorize that activity as B. And then let's just make an assumption that as that frontier is exploding out there, that we're going to have to learn more and more about how to figure out where to go, which is a B job, and how to get there, which is a B job. And so you got to raise the capability level of the B activity. So that's another level of capability. So it turned out this was sort of like a doodling thing, and then it began to fall into place as a very useful way to think about. So you said, okay, this is the picture of an improvement infrastructure element within your organization, and it has pieces of it that flow out all through there. And when I became forced out into the commercial world and then into the industrial world, and I wasn't a very good fit, but I learned a lot. And one of the things that I began to observe is every time there was something relatively significant that was going to be changed in manufacturing or even sales or marketing or planning, they'd have a committee from around inside the corporation. And these were guys who all didn't report to the same boss until they got way up there, who wasn't involved with it. So it was really like a community. So I got to thinking about how prevalent is the idea of a community. And within big organizations, that's often part of the improvement. So I wrote a big paper in the 80s about mission and discipline-oriented communities, and saying they're important. The mission-oriented one is like the people that belong to a professional society who all have the same mission of curing cancer or something. And discipline-oriented, that's it. And a mission-oriented one is all the people involved in a focused project. And they often come from different parts of organizations, etc., to do that. So then I said, okay, they all work in a distributed knowledge workshop. So I started coining using the term for a community's knowledge workshop. And then I said, oh, what we want to deal with is an augmented knowledge workshop. So I started using that term quite a bit, which is really an effective one. If it fits into this picture very well, you think about, okay, so that's what's going to go through a revolution, is this augmented knowledge workshop that we work in individually, and then there's communities. You work with one community, you're sort of in one workshop, another one like this. excuse me, I could probably say, well, I get so excited I forget to breathe. It's this power of having an audience that just out of politeness has to sit there. Right. So anyway, as the paradigm map is evolving in this sense, it's pretty good. So it says, okay, that's pretty good. So how about this investment criteria strategy? Oh, then that leads to this bootstrap strategy. So you add one other thing to the one we talked about before. We observed that goal 1 is a complex pursuit. You say, okay, but if you make headway in goal 1, and since it itself is a complex urgent problem, then if you make headway in being able to improve our capability collectively to deal with complex urgent problems, we ought to be able to deal better with the complex urgent problem of pursuing complex urgent problems. So this 3 says, all right, we apply that capability in our pursuit of that. And anybody that does any kind of dynamic assessment or something and looks at feedback and compound interest or something says, yeah, sure, of course. But okay, then that's the kind of thing that evolved out of this thing. So as just looking at that and says, bootstrap strategy, then you says, okay, if any of these groups is producing something for the next higher one that it can use itself, feed it back. And some of the B things are producing new capabilities to use in A. Boy, it'd be silly if it didn't use it itself, or maybe feed it back down so C could do it, etc. like this. So we just say, okay, then it's here's a picture to take with this thing. Suppose you outsource the help you get for doing your B work. And so the consultant comes in and he says, okay, here's the way we're going to do now. Here are the brand new computer tools you can do to collaboration and all of this, and go on and really telling you how to do it. And you start scratching your head. You says, well, why don't you just show us? And the jaw will drop and it says, no, I mean, your consulting organization must be working this new way. So wouldn't it be a lot easier if we came and watched how you work? Oh, see, this is one of the real tests. So in fact, it'd be a very interesting way of which, if more and more people that got onto this kind of thing started asking the people who are so much pushing the technologies out into the world and saying how much you need it, how much value will be, and says, okay, let's just see if you think it's going to be a revolution in there, let's see how you use it to do that. I think that would make a very significant difference in the world if we turned to those big corporations and just said, well, look, show us, inside your work, inside your world, how much difference is it the way you can launch or assess new research things, new production techniques, etc., and how much are you deal with outside information about what's happening in the world that's relevant to you. Where does it go? How is it used by everybody? Who does the assessing of it? Things like that. So show us the dynamics of your knowledge workshop. And so anyway, when the world gets to the point where they start asking those things, and even more advanced when they have start of measures, that, the thing that the quality people were telling us one of our sessions about benchmarking and measuring. Well, this would be extremely valuable in the world if we had benchmarking measures for something of the equivalent of what's the collective IQ of your company, or of your research group, or of your professional society, etc., or of your state, or of your country. So this would be fabulous to get started thinking and comparative stuff. So it would really be a turnaround. So maybe all we could do in the world about getting this going is to start pressing for getting measures like this put out, and it'd be interesting to see what kind of companies would sit up and start changing. But anyway, so then we say, okay, the next thing in that bootstrapping strategy, the kind of thing that could really feed back best is that which we started talking about up there in the objective, and which we come to call collective IQ. And we says, okay, working together we depend on collective knowledge, and it's got to be recorded. If there are any big groups moving any kind of dynamic, complex world, and the computer and all that, and sharing of knowledge, and the hypermedia, etc., is all making a big difference for that. And then the questions about how much more difference. But okay, collectively depending on that, and we say, yes, we got this model, and the thing we call the dynamic knowledge repository, and we sort of keep talking about the three major components of that repository being these things, and we won't dig down into those today. We've done some of that in the past. But anyway, it's just like saying, okay, that how many organizations really fly like that effectively? So he said, okay, we'll just call that representing our collective IQ, that's where it's going to come from. It's people swarming around and operating on this. And we pointed out in the past that maybe each one of these nodes around here is an individual, and this is a team. Well, great. Well, each individual is going to have his or her own sort of repository they use too, but there is this common one that's concurrently evolving along with theirs. Or maybe each one of these things in the circle is a team or a division in a corporation, and this is the big corporation. And we know that concurrently they're all changing. So this currently business up here is just a key kind of aspect of all this. So we've decided, yep, we've been through this before, and we say, yep, we hear concurrently, and that's the big challenge, is that and it leads to the next issue there of, well, this is one way of looking at collectively. Hey, this can be a big corporation and all the little pieces, or a big conglomerate and all the little minor corporations, or all the individuals working in a professional society and trying to cure something, etc. So that's an issue, and we'll look at it later about the kind of scale in which you find that sort of thing going on in the world. And so the other kind of issue, okay, so we coined this sometime the last 8-9 years ago. We coined this term CoDIAK. We said, it'd be nice to isolate just a major subset of the capabilities an organization needs to have in order to represent a higher collective IQ. So we just finally came up that it has to be able to do this well. And concurrently develop, integrate, and apply knowledge. And so how serviceable this acronym will be, we have to get more dynamics in the world before we find out. So then as a, what I was threatening to do in this colloquium is I found a photograph of me milking a cow in a little old cruddy barn that my family had on a little plot of land, and my father died when I was young, and we had this acre, and part of it was vegetables that we grew, and we kept a cow in this little barn, and the neighbors let us run the cow in their pasture, and it was my job, because I was the older son, get up morning, night, go do the milking. And all right. So my sister, jokester as she was, sneaked up there with, I don't know where she got a flash anyway, but there's a flash of a picture, and there's this 14-year-old kid sitting on an upside down bucket with this sort of dirty straw around the floor. It all looked just perfectly normal in those days, in very rustic parts, and the cow placidly, I think, what would we name her? She had a beautiful name. Anyway, but looking at that and realizing how far the distance was from there in so many ways, because sort of a country kid that really was different, because even in the Depression, very poor, but happy, we all family thrown together, joked, we didn't feel deprived, we just felt poor. And there's a real difference. So, but also felt different. I knew I was different when I went to school. Okay, so I'm different. So it didn't panic me or put me into anything like that. So I sort of grew up being used to being different, and not quite understanding how other people thought, and they measured their social life, etc. And like the crowning time was when I was a junior, sitting there and looking up and down the rows, and for the first time looking at all the shoes. And I was the only one with old-fashioned, high-top, farmer shoes. They were my only pair of shoes, so that's all right. But then I looked at that a second time, and I was the only one with cow manure on his shoes. So, I'm different. But, it could have turned me into something mortified. Oh, my God. No, just, hey, those are my only shoes, so why should I have some more? But anyway, that picture alone in there sort of tells me all that about that somehow I grew up I just wasn't the same, and I didn't think the same, and so on like that. And I wasn't particularly proud of not thinking the same, and it caused me a lot of trouble at times, and so forth. And when I went to college, I almost flunked out of a state college for the first 2 quarters because I was trying to learn everything that they said. So I never did really get smart about how to study or take tests or something, but I ended up with a 4 when I graduated for some reason, and I got through graduate school. And so anyway, I just looked at it and says, well, okay, that kid never did get to be like everybody else, and it doesn't really sink into him that that's something he should be the same. It's just, okay, I'm different. And my sense of humor takes over sometimes when it shouldn't, and anyway, so, but that was something about coming out with this very different sort of strategy. It's sort of part of the same thing. Well, it's sort of what I saw when I started thinking about it, and it meant so much to me about what the world was that I still keep at it. And I know that a lot of people think this jerky guy, why is he still talking about that? Everybody's doing it already. And he says, well, I don't understand that they are. My picture is very different, and things like that. So anyway, I share these things with you because I don't just naturally assume that, look, I won a lot of prizes for things I thought about and did years ago. Therefore, you just have to listen to me because, of course, I'm right. It's the same country kid saying, well, I don't know, I just still see it that way, and I would really appreciate it if I could get more people to at least talk seriously with me. So that's one way of sort of saying what the hoped-for outcome of this colloquium can be, is that we can somehow raise more participatory activity, and which would take resources for people to start spending time doing this, and also some of the things we'd like to build just to show the world. That's my alarm clock first. Anyway, I bet it embarrasses him more than it does me.
Apparently not.
Oh. Anyway, so I'll keep on showing you these things and telling you, and just because if it sounds strange, well, you know, that doesn't really defeat me in itself. But I really wish we could get people to start investing some time and energy in trying to go after this, because, like I say, every year sooner the world could start moving that way. It could make a big difference. And that's only going to start moving that way sort of one person at a time for a while. And so that's the way it goes. So anyway, when I got McDonnell Douglas as one of the products like that, I got some kind of rude awakening and often some rude treatment because I was so naive. But in amongst of looking at the manufacturing world that they were doing and that like that, there's a number of people started to spend more and more time with me, and they showed me interesting things. Like one thing they said, well, this system, we were calling it Augment then, it really could do a lot of interlinking with a lot of people. But they said, hey, look what happens. There are actually like 6,000 companies that are cooperating with the 2,000 or so people inside the aerospace firm in the design and manufacture of a fighter aircraft. And I understand it's 13 to 15,000 companies in a big airliner. And it says, okay, they are all a community working together, and the kind of communications that needs to go on among them is detailed, and it's key important. And when you're first formulating it, you got to co-design with some of these suppliers, etc. So specifications have to be laid out and adhered to, that you're contracting to produce this part under these specifications of testing and finishing and all of that. And so you have to be very clear that you're working to the same specifications that we think you are, etc. And so you said, boy, the way you could interlink all that such would just make the whole thing so much better. And we started looking into it and figuring out ways in which you could do it, but it just became so obvious that you're not going to get the kind of interlinking, collaborative sort of tying down a coherent knowledge base like that unless there's a basic, common, open system in which the knowledge containers are a meat address. And so young man John Bozak has been launching the whole thing about XML, which is a great direction on that. But in those days, in the 80s, nobody ever heard of that. And it just became so real that we got really saying that the business of trying to promote the evolution of an open hyperdocument system is critical. And it's still, something of that sort still is. And I don't feel that the movement towards the open standards is balanced enough and moving fast enough and can deal with the needs for the evolution that we're talking about. So that becomes a very basic part of the picture about what has to be done in that respect. And so the second period, during the next hour and a half, that this is something we're going to be talking about quite a bit. And that says, I know that a lot of people have given us feedback that said, hey, the techie thing is, we know the techie's world there, but look at all the other problems involved with it. So what I want to point out is that in all the levels of this infrastructure that exist in there like this, it's like if you're going to build a new multi-level big thing like this, you got to have the foundation that's strong enough to take this new structure that's going to be a lot more integrated with all the levels in it than before. And that foundation, to me, it sits right into this business of the marriage of the open hyperdocument system with the changes in the way we think and work with it. That those have to be something, if you're going to collaborate with somebody and you put together on a project because you're both, civil engineers or both marketing people or something, and you got to come together some consistent plan, and if you can't talk together in this new way, you're in trouble. So anyway, this global interoperability was just a big, big, big thing. And as we said before, we went in to talk about this open hyperdocument system. And we've done several times, written papers about it, and some of those papers are available on the web, and they talk about some of the details as some of the things we learned in the system we built that just add a lot of value. And we know they add a lot of value because we lived with it for years. And so in the second hour today, I'm going to be pointing out some of those things, and then some of the people sitting here around are going to sort of talk about, hey, the stages we could actually launch in order to do something like that, even if it's voluntary, even if it's just inviting the world to go open source and explore it with us. So anyway, these are general terms here, that to facilitate collaboration, coordination, collective work, real work, to capture, integrate, and manage the emergent heterogeneous knowledge, to enhance access, maneuverability, and reutilization, scalable, interoperable across domains, etc., all kinds of virtues and things like that. Those aren't terms that you hear fairly often now, but unless people share a similar perception about how much more there is to learn about how to use these sort of knowledge packages and what they should have as properties in them and functionality on them like that. If you don't have a common picture, if you sort of think that the way the web works and the web pages are now is we're there, well, then we're not talking the same language. So again, it's a paradigm issue that affects very, very much how seriously someone would take about considering this and going after it. So anyway, I just invite people to start getting active about at least talking more seriously about this to shake it out. So in our the sort of world that ended up we call the augment world, we long time worked on this kind of a package for that we call it throwaway email because anyway, so we've talked about this in the past, that shared files and email all were interlinkable from 1970 on to any detail you wanted to, and the optional viewing, so a link could say, pop to some place and say how you want it to be viewed, that when you follow this link, I want this view presented to you because that sort of depicts the issues about that citation issue that I wanted to characterize. So there just grew to be more and more and more kinds of viewing option specs in the language like that. And then we got this journal system up, which meant that it was a library-like thing that any organization could run according to specs, and it meant that if you were qualified to enter information there, you just submitted a document electronically, almost like it was an email, and it took it into its embrace, and it would give you either beforehand or then an identifier for that that stayed permanent, and guarantee that at any time anybody used that identifier in a link to access it, what they'd get was what was you published that minute, and that no one could change it. And if they wanted to update it, they'd have to, when they entered it, have to say this is superseding that earlier one, so that anybody going with a citation link that would aim at the earlier one was stopped in mid-travel to say it's been superseded, do you want the new one or the old one? So there would be more smarter ways to do it than we did at the time like that, but that just, you just have to believe me, I guess it changed the way the dialogue worked, just changed immensely from the way it is today. So anyway, and then external documents were also cataloged, etc. There are many things in there that would take hours to show and tell, which is something that because of the way this presentations we give here are packaged and webcast, etc., we can't give live demonstrations. So we give these things where a slide shows this is one state, and then here's the next picture, and here's the next picture. I'll give a few of those in the next hour. But one of the things I really want to do is fix up so that we can give some demonstrations of this and other systems that are around, and have those archived in ways in which anytime somebody can say, oh, you're talking about a feature, yeah, we do that here. I can give you a URL that'll point right to the demonstration segment where the guy's showing about it, and another URL where there's a description of it and like that. And if you have comments to make, you can do it. Or when you get there and are watching that, the backlink management will also let you, if you want to find out who else is talking about that same passage, either passage in the video or by a slide or in text or email, etc. So these are all things that are just going to evolve, and parts of them are already out there that have to be brought together. So anyway, so this open hyperdocument system is just fundamental key. So we go to the next target in here, next paradigm, which is, oh, suppose we start making headway, that we found ways in which we can improve an organization capability. Well, that's an interesting resource. Where would be best deploy it? So that's what that deployment target thing is about there, like that. So anyway, so out of that came the idea of high-performance teams, that this was something very promising, and it grows on you the more you think about it as an element and a strategy about how you explore high-performance organizations, is start out by getting in the teams. So he says, okay, we mean explicitly recruited, equipped, and trained as though for competitive performance assessment. And here we're not talking about that you just designate this sales team or design team as going to be your high-performance team, and you give them a little bit more lessons and another little bit. Sure, they're moved up like that, but that isn't what we're talking about of a way to really move out into that frontier. So anyway, we just say also no limit to the unusual ways in which their fundamental sensory, perceptual, cognitive, motor capabilities are trained, conditioned, and harnessed. Just anything you can think of, and put to work in them. And strategically, it seems the best first to engage such teams as support teams, providing special service to larger teams operating in the current mode. So we've talked about that before, but and I would love to dig down into that with people to say more of the rationale for why, etc., or examples of what you could do. But it's just really very, very, very basic for me. So this is the picture that we used for a long time in this paradigm map, of saying, all right, here's the distribution of capability throughout an organization, and that curve is not, it would be some kind of a sideways S-curve, I'm sure. But the thing was saying, the one option you could come in and say, I'm going to improve everybody's capability. That's mode one of improving it. And this is, sure, you know, if you introduce email and everybody has access to it, you've done something for everybody like that. But if we're going to get more and more kind of exploratory and dramatic about what you're going to do, it says, well, I really need to test it first. So let's get some small, specially trained group like that and elevate them in capability. But we need to do it so that they can work with the rest of them. And so that's part of the whole strategic sort of issue and plan. Well, another mode then is, if you have one like that, is you can expand it. That's mode 3. Or mode 4 is that you just duplicate it. So I couldn't think of any other modes by which you'd start bringing significant new capabilities into an organization. So he says, okay, these are all modes, and strategically speaking, which of those modes are the best return on investment for that? Okay. So anyway, it's interesting. So when we were introducing things starting in 1974 over the ARPANET, providing service that was just like in that box I showed you, integrated mail and file and journal, and a lot of characteristics and features in there that were quite dramatic. And we were doing this to people who had access to the ARPANET, which limited to government, etc. But this is one of the things we were trying to tell them is you need to sort of focus on specific groups and help them move ahead. And then every time they get together, they'd always hear about people saying, you've got to make it easier to learn, it's hard. Until one time one of the guys was sitting there listening, he says, you know, I haven't heard that in my organization lately. And they all says, well, that's because, you know, you aren't bringing new people. Oh, but we are. And he was the longest user. And when they got to figuring this out, well, what it meant was a new user came in, and looked around, everybody else was, as a matter of fact, using it, no big sweat. Sure, you don't know how, but it's easy, so all you had to do was ask somebody at another desk, sure, I'll show you, I'll tell you. And it was just taken for granted about how they came in and got assimilated and learned. And so there wasn't any of this big stress like when new groups suddenly get plunked into the middle of it. So the evolutionability of a group like that is something that is group culture conditioned. And it's something just to train. So anyway.
There is a fifth mode that you probably want to recognize, and that's one of the most... I have the button pushed. I don't know if it's doing any good. The fifth mode is probably the one that is most common in the world of business today, and that is you take something away from somebody and give it to somebody else. So you create an indentation in your model, and you move that inverted upside down somewhere else. So you've actually deprived a certain group of the resources, looking on it as a zero-sum game. And I think in the practical world that's very common. I don't like it, but it's the way it works.
All right. Thank you. That's the trouble with a guy like him. He makes you think. Thank you, Peter. Well, I'll get back at him later. Oh, great. Anyway, it's just the kind of thing of how it is. So if you had a research group that was building a dynamic repository, you'd like to start collecting this scoop and information in the lore, in those case studies of things that would be valuable. So anyway, progressing around this, it says, okay, then the key deployment for high-performance support teams, and the idea that we ended up with, watching how things worked out in our own world, is supporting a larger, conventionally capable community organization or project team. So a high-performance team in the middle as a support team was just so in a way our trainers were acting like that, and the fact that we had the shared screen kind of capability from 74 on, so that somebody could call up, say they're in trouble, and they could connect, so no matter where the two of them were on the network, they would both be seeing the same display working, and then the trainer could say, I see what you're doing, hey, you know, there's a better way you can do that. Oh yeah? Tell me. Well, no, wait a minute. Pass me the controls and I'll show you. So then the trainer starts operating it and the other person watches. And it just was a big step ahead in the flexibility by which people out there started being able to sort of get help and depend upon people. And much more friendly thing than if it was only talking on the telephone, that they're actually just, it was almost like somebody coming and sitting down next to you and showing you. And since they could just do it electronically, it was much more flexibly usable. So anyway, so these high performance support team thing just kind of grew in my mind, and I really think that there's a great deal it could do in the middle of complex projects, for instance, or in the middle of any company. And when we talk about the CoDIAK, which was the concurrently developing, integrating, and applying knowledge, that integrating role is sort of like a digestion and stuff like that of what all's happening in there. How do you sort of integrate it as rapidly and effectively as you can so that people can go look at it as though it's an up-to-date handbook. That's what we used to call it, and they're all the time. Sections past them. So anyway, so the thing about when you're getting ready for that frontier, these A, B, and C that we've talked about become very important like that. So he says, okay, the C kind of thing is like a scout out in the frontiers to finding out what's happening out there, where can I help find a good place for you to aim at and tell you sort of more about how you can move better out there. Then the B is the one that leads the wagon train that's going to go out there, like that. So this helped a lot in clarifying for people, hey, what is this categorization like? And the common business of saying, let's pool resources to do that exploration out there to help get a better idea of what's out there and what works and doesn't, and what are the pathways by which organizations can shift out there, so that it just, if the frontier has suddenly gone out there like that, that makes sense. So if your paradigm of your organizational leaders don't picture the frontier like that, then they're not going to be terribly responsive about this sharing business in an improvement community. But it says, look, somehow we get evidence. So pretty soon they'll start having cooperative sharing between larger organizations that are sharing the C kind of information about how it is, what's out there, how they can move, and that they'll be moving faster. And they'll just, so I have to get examples. So we say, okay, look for other organizations heading the same way, and then say pool their C work like this. So this was the pictures we would give to people over the decades like that, and say a dynamic repository is what that community bests on, and then the community itself is bootstrapping itself by using the advanced techniques for doing the work, and its C work is just an ideal sort of way in which you put a high performance. So if you can make the actual actuation of that C community's knowledge work supported by a high performance support team, then you've got something where every organization out there is sort of benefiting by the interaction with that and witnessing it and seeing it, as well as the knowledge that is thus better organized for them. So we say that improvement community is now part of our paradigm picture, and it's putting there like that. So organization 1, 2, etc. are part of it. There's a dynamic knowledge repository, and it's in there. So we say, okay, then in succeeding years, we say, oh, what we'd really like to do is say, let's make a NIC of NICs. Where heretofore the network improvement community was oriented just for how you improve organizations, but now we say, look, let's help a family of NICs get better at being NICs. And so it kind of can get a meta levels going in there. So he says, okay, if we really get this idea of these improvement communities and improvement infrastructures, as over in this box to the right, if we get that really starting to work, what's the limit for how big you can get an organization moving like that? Can you get a national improvement infrastructure? And so, oh, look what we've put into here. He says, so the whole nation itself could actually be represented by a portrayal like this, but so could its improvement infrastructure. So what would a national improvement infrastructure look like? Well, there's already one there. It's just sort of organically grown, and different parts of it work differently, and big government agencies have one process of changing and improving, if you can believe it. That'd be a joke, I guess, but and then you says, oh, what about the legislative part of the government? Oh, Would there be any room for improvement there? This is probably. But, you know, for representative government to be able to understand well enough what's happening in a really complex world in order to establish laws and oversee regulations get established, it's just getting more and more so, you know, ordinary people, no way can they understand enough to do it. And no way is the sort of current politics aiming at getting something that is socially, or, you know, what civilization as a whole needs best. I don't think that's, I don't think I'm being, could I be shot for saying things like that? Well, anyway, anyway, you just look at it, judicial things too. Like every aspect of our government, every aspect of the way our science is done, every aspect of the way business is done, education is done, every place in which rules and worries and concerns like Jerry Glenn's and Peter Yim's work at getting these 15 sort of major challenges to the world out like that. So anyway, you just can look at that and says, all right, it would be worth a great deal for people to spend time sort of decomposing and looking at what is the national improvement infrastructure, and then just saying it. Why not think about that as something in turn? Could it start with a state? A state sort of set the pace for doing that. Well, how soon would a state say that we should really bring in other states and form ourselves a NIC and of states that are working together better? Or a state get counties together, or whole countries. So one of the things that's fun to welcome today is Professor Ohashi here. Where's he hiding? Oh, no fair, right up in front. So he came and talked once before, but he's here today with a group of colleagues. They're sitting over here, right? And to sort of visiting us, and they've actually donated money for helping pay or to pay for the reception tonight, which we ought to be thankful for. And and so you all act very soberly and appropriate, right? Anyway, but so there's a challenge of sort of setting up to say, okay, what could you do in a country? And one of the interesting things that Japan can do is to sort of shame the other countries about saying, hey, look, we're investing government, you know, national government money into this kind of thing to make it work. So what about you other countries? So I wish you'd say that in the direction of Washington, D.C. a little bit. That would be helpful. But so anyway, this is just part of that paradigm. So one of the things to look at and says, well, even if the next step you say, this is acknowledging what you guys started, which is great. This other step is saying a global one. Well, what do you know? That the graphic looks the same. And it's sort of like saying, okay, you know, an augmented infrastructure is an augmented infrastructure. The details and the number of levels would change, etc., but they have that same basic characteristic. And so you look at these things and says, someplace that is a real thing that's working now, sort of. If you're going to make it work better, you got to build it sort of like, I got to build a real structure to it. And what is that structure sitting on? So this observation is what brings me my answer to people when I say, I really think we should pursue this open hyperdocument system seriously, and really seriously pursue high-performance teams, and really pursue seriously that the open hyperdocument system provides for multiple classes of user interface and things like that, because that's the foundation I look at in these multiple things. If you don't really give enough attention to that foundation, it's hard to picture how you can design and plan multi-tiered thing. It's just like you got elevators, and okay, well look, we can do multi-story buildings. Well, yeah, but you have to pay a little bit of attention as you're layering up here architecturally for foundations and structures that will sustain that kind of scale. So it's the same way here. So anyway, so the plan for how to get all this started just has to take real cognizance of this scale that you're trying to be serious about going after. So this sometimes would inhibit the free thinking about some people. It's like say, let's do this and that. He says, well, that's going to be pretty weak foundation, etc. But anyway, so these are kind of things to think about. So I think this is pretty much, anyway. So this is sort of making an appeal again for the kind of high-level needs for developing a framework and the participation. And from this global perspective, it sort of emerges a general major challenge, getting each size and type of institution, community, and organization alert to the challenge. And then where in a large scope infrastructure would be the most likely to get the process underway.
Hawaii, African dialect.
Yeah, you can see that when I'm putting these things together, so this was probably about 11:30 this morning, and I was struggling like crazy to say what can I say next, and anyway, don't get it. So I won't even apologize. It's just think of the little boy milking the cow and say he's different.
That's utter nonsense.
You're right. That's no bull. I remember what the cow's name. It was Samantha. So now the lecture's complete. See? She used to like my whistling, and I found I learned how to warble all over the place, but I didn't have any idea how to carry a tune. And my sister was a violin player, and she wouldn't let me whistle in the house. So Samantha and I got acquainted because she liked my whistling. See? So anyway, so we look at these big scope infrastructures, and whom do we get to start talking, and how do we talk, and find things at different levels like that to find the common things to say, is this idea of improvement infrastructures at these large scales something that actually society could start trying to put together? And if Japan starts trying to do something coherent as a nation, that would just be a very good lesson. And other countries ought to do that too. And take dialogue to figure out, it's not going to be simple, but the countries that start to do it right, I'm just sure will start exponentially boosting their capability to use their mental resources and knowledge, etc. better. And Peter Yim and I once were talking about how we could go invade China that way. And I got some friends and distant relatives in Norway that we talk about that too. And 2 or 3 other countries have people from them would say, oh boy. So I would really like to see that kind of dialogue get going about that. So one of the things we showed before in here was diagrams I made in 1961 about, if you could do this thing with feedback. And in a diagram like this, the solid lines are sort of knowledge and things that you could say work on this. Hey, here's a design of something, I can work on it to improve it or something. And the dotted lines coming in are saying, here are tools and processes that can help you improve the way you work. So the whole thing then started building this and making an infrastructure with those feedback lines, the dotted and solid lines. So this one may not be applicable today at all, but that's representing the kind of thing I'd really like to get going on with people. That says, let's hypothesize different structures of organizational units and task forces, etc. out there, and the kind of feedback you could get, and just listen and think about which ones of those combinations would have you the best strategic leverage. So anyway, so at a high level, what we're going to need is we need help with resources and active participation, because it's not enough just to give money. And whom do we hire? You can't hire normal researchers to get very far in that. You have to get people who come from, have been immersed in different kind of organizations, have to be involved in some of this work about getting conjectures and trying to make a picture of how things happen in there. So the value propositions that you can bring to different kind of organizations about, participating in an appropriate improvement infrastructure. So if you don't get that, you're not going to get improvement infrastructure working. And if you don't have one working, you're not going to really learn. So that's an engineer's approach to say, okay. So anyway, so we need help in raising central funding grants. We need help in recruiting active participation. And so anybody that ideas or wants to help or participate would just be very, very welcome, because it's the hope we have about that. So anyway, we're going to look at the infrastructure foundation for the next period. And so now we've done this together. So what we're going to do next is to say, hey, I've been rambling around a lot here, and we have 10 minutes more. Who would like to sort of ask questions or make comments besides Peter? Somebody top him. Boy, I know that, is there somebody? Oh.
Would you put your last slide up?
This is going to have to be,
I think one before that. Excellent. Yeah. Okay. I think
I'd just like to hear you talk about that a little bit more, and possibly leave that up during the break.
I'd like to propagate it around the world. No. Yeah. Well, there are a series of volunteers. There's a little bit of money that's been donated now that can start helping. Something called the Engelbart Fellowship Fund. And it was trying to get corporations to put money into that, but it got a little bit entangled, because it was nice to have that given to a not-for-profit so that the donor with tax deductible, but then we find interesting rules about what not-for-profits can do with it. For instance, they can't pass it through to the Bootstrap Institute because they can't do laundering. And so so we were a little naive in setting that up. So anyway, we're looking for that. We're looking for just trying to go out to philanthropic organizations and say, hey, we think we can make a very good, value proposition for you. For instance, your philanthropic organization is really concerned about the environment. So you're trying to put money into people that are trying to do studies and promote better environmental practices. Well, if you put money into our thing, one of the consequences are going to be things that we can show how to improve the capability of the people you're trying to do this other project. So any venture that people want to invest in, it looks like investing in this stuff could come around soon and start improving the capability of that investment to do it. And then also we'd like to get with big government activities like NASA or something that says, look, complex projects are a great place to focus on in this thing. They're doing that. And we'd also like to get people who are in the software business to partake in that, because that has even stronger bootstrapping. So this is one of the things in the second hour we'll be talking about particularly. But anyway, or people that are running now an improvement community of some size, etc. Well, how much, if they joined a Meta-NIC to become a NIC themselves and improve that, it'd be great. The one thing about it is that it's going to cost money. You have to have resources to put into this pooled thing, and so that sort of thought, because a lot of improvement communities are just running bare budget as it is. So that's where you could, anyway. One thing that'd be very important is to knock on the door of some big companies that pride themselves on, they're right at the front of the technology and stuff, and say, hey, are you going to get right at the front of being collective IQ smart? And would you like to sort of participate in with others to figure out what are the measures of that and how you could advance, etc.? Or would you like to watch other people go together to do that, and they would come and measure you? Did you have a question?
Yeah, most of the discussion in here has been around developing the DKR, the
open hyperdocument system, or a lot of focus on the tool aspect of that. And I was just wondering if you've given much thought to working with, like, let's say Jerry Glenn with this 15 global challenges and stuff, just in terms of the human system, revising their tools and their methodologies. The stuff he described with the way they proposed the questions and got answers through around the world seemed like a interesting new, improved way of boosting an IQ, and just wondering about working to fix that.
Those are the things that motivated me many years ago. But the more I think about strategy, how do you get that capability richly in there, you end up strategically looking that earlier on you'd get more effectively there sooner if you got the bootstrapping going, which, for instance, is what we'll be talking about tonight. But anyway, it's some, if you were helping a community that was helping learn how to make artificial rubber better for something, you says, well, that might be good for the environment, but their product isn't going to come back and do anything to elevate the capability of other NICs. Whereas if you go into some of these others, wow, everything they put out will do it. And so it's really a strategy that even in the military you've got to weigh off the things like that. But that's the kind of thing that I just would very much welcome people talking about, that value proposition actually goes into that. And the governance of any improvement community itself needs to decide how it's going to invest, etc. So if you're working with communities, one of whose products is better governance, wow, that's going to help everybody. See? And so you could even listen to John Bozak more happily now about, hey, he's trying to improve a governance sort of process that would be very important. And that everybody could use that. Like that.
Hi. Well, I'm really glad to be here because we spoke just a couple of days ago. I found it just out by chance, this series, and it turns out that we have been thinking along the same lines, even though not in the detailed way you've been thinking, and trying to apply this concept, how to really run the world, how to create new models of governance, to apply those in the political scale, because we see that the lack of efficient global institutions to deal with the complex problems we have is really leading to or preventing us from solving problems like wars and misery and so forth. So we launched this last year coalition to deal with the problem of how could we implement on the global level the basic principle of democracy, which seems on the political level one of the elements that such a system would need. How can you, the translation of what you're talking about, I think, on the political level is or has to include some kind of measure of or implementation of democratic principle. And it's very encouraging to see that democracy as a principle or democracy as a real tool is spreading around the world and is spreading at an increasing rate. So I think that we've already been in contact, we're just going to continue on, and we really want to work with you to kind of make the connection on the political scale, how we create those global institutions and use some of the concepts you've developed.
Well, and we'd say, okay, we all benefit by joining forces. So anyway, so our time I hear is running out, so that we'll meet again in 10 or so minutes for a second period, and this has been good, and thank you. And in the reception, so people woke up and cornered because that's a kind of interesting candidate, so go sound out to say, whatever it is he's organizing, how would that sort of have some mutual interaction of bootstrapping sort? So if we had lots of time, it'd be nice to work on that. So okay, we'll see you in 10 minutes.
What happened to the foundation money?